Welcome to the Idea Climbing Podcast. Today, we're discussing why every entrepreneur is their own media company with my guest, Gresham Harkless. We cover topics such as why it's important to have a clear target market and how to define one, how to create and execute your next social media strategy, how to start a podcast that best suits your zone of genius, and more golden nuggets of advice. I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you for tuning in to the Idea Climbing Podcast. Today, my guest is Gresham W. Harkless Jr. He's an entrepreneur and blogger. Gresh, as people call him, is the founder of Blue 16 Media. Blue 16 Media uses media and technology to change lives. His other past ventures include founding Exemplary Editing, Kids Sports Drill, and co-founding the nonprofit Men of Character of Virginia. As a child, he started a monthly family newsletter, which was his first media company. We'll have to talk about that. And sold everything from necklaces on the playground to potato chips and candy. He currently works to help support small businesses and entrepreneurship. Thank you for being here, Gresh. I appreciate you making the time.
Mark, truly appreciate you. Excited to be here.
And it obviously started at an early age. If you want to go back to the family newsletter, cool. But as far as every entrepreneur is their own media company, when did that belief start for you? What's the story? How did you discover that?
Yeah, you touched on it a little bit. I think a lot of that came from when I was 10 years old. My dad was in the military. The short of it is we didn't have all these snazzy tools to connect instantaneously as we do now all across the world or in different states or towns or whatever that is. So I would hop on Microsoft Word and basically put some clip art in, talk about the things that were going on in our family. And we would send these care packages to my dad every month. And in those care packages were my newsletters and newspapers. And I also sold the subscriptions to members and members that were close to the family. And the reason like that really, rings true with everything I do now is because a lot of times I went through different, I guess, roadblocks in my life or basically moments where I was unsure of exactly who I was and what I wanted to do. And that kind of story kind of resonated with me. So fast forward a lot of years, I have the digital marketing company and a lot of our philosophy is around, building, media companies. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the full I guess steroid version of a lot of things that I'm doing now, but a lot of times it's building that foundation so that you are doing the things to help solve problems, just like I was my 10-year-old self.
When you say who you were, how does someone discover who they are? How did you discover that?
That's a great question. And, I don't necessarily know that I know all the answers, but I believe truly that a lot of times there's a lot of noise in our lives, and that happens at different times and different stages. And usually when you're a kid, you have a little bit more kind of reign to do whatever you're interested in. And
Yeah.
you don't have the expectations of saying you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, you need to be this, you need to be that, or you should be doing this, or you should be doing that. So I'm a big believer that if you go back to things that you did as a kid, there's seeds that are sometimes planted in terms of like who you are, what lights you up, potentially what is your superpower, or like I like to call it your secret sauce. So I don't necessarily know all the answers, but I know I hear a lot where people said, I used to do X when I was a kid, and I really, really miss doing that. And to me, that kind of screams like this is something that probably lights you up and ultimately who you are, and maybe even, part of your purpose.
For discovering who you are at a young age, was that the family newsletter or did it come after that?
For me, I think it was that. So I was that kid, like you mentioned when you read my bio. I sold potato chips on the playground. I got my parents to go to MJ Design so I can get beads, so I can make necklaces and do things like that. The only thing that makes me not believe that that was part of like who I was is that I feel like I was copying a lot of what I saw with other kids. I would see a kid do it. I was like, hey, I want to do that too. The newspaper, I don't know a lot of people that had that when they were younger. So I know I was always interested in writing, so it was a lot of things that started to build. It wasn't just that, but when you start to kind of look back at, what you're interested in your life, you start to see those certain kind of inflection moments where you're like,
Mhm.
hey, maybe there's something there, and that's what it was for me.
So in your adult life, where did the media start with you? Was it started with blogging, social media back in '07? Where do you consider the start of your media personality, media business to be?
Yeah, I think it progressed all throughout my life. Like I mentioned, I love writing. I love, content creation. And these are all terms we use now. Like if I was to go back to my 10-year-old self, 15-year-old self, 20-year-old self, I wouldn't be necessarily talking about media. But I think the company that I started, Blue 16 Media, that was actually 10, almost 11 years ago. And the reason I chose media is because I was always fascinated around the different ways that you can kind of communicate. It was everything from, at that time I was like, I don't know, I want to start a business, not sure exactly what I want to start. I'm interested in video, I'm interested in blogging, I'm interested in all these different things. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to choose. So I'm going to choose media, but I always felt like there was a kind of amalgamation of all these different platforms and different ways that people were communicating because I've always been, I felt like a journalist at heart. As I talked about being my 10-year-old self, I've always wanted to hear stories, hear what led people to start their business, hear about, what and how people are kind of purpose driven. All those things kind of um, stuck with me. The stories really
Yeah.
stuck with me. And as I started to see, I became an English major when I was an undergrad. I wanted to do journalism, but I wasn't ballsy enough, I guess, to do that because of the industry was being destroyed. So I've always studied that industry. I've always studied how things have changed and evolved, and this thing that we all have in our pockets has completely been a game changer because now we have media in so many different ways where we can record people, we can video people, we can write blogs or send tweets or do all these things. So it was kind of like I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know media is going to be a part of ultimately where I want to go.
So, as far as why do you believe every entrepreneur is their own media company? I could take a few guesses, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah. I'm probably touching on it a little bit.
Yeah.
But I truly feel like we're in this day and age where we do have this smartphone that's in our pocket, iPhone, Android, whatever is your cup of tea. You have the power to be able to communicate with your potential ideal clients and customers to fit whatever need you might have. A lot of times I play, of course, in the lane of business, people that want to connect with their clients and customers and really want to be able to provide value for them as quickly as possible and in a way that meets them exactly where they are. But I see media very broadly. I simply see it as a way of communicating information from one person or one entity to another. So if you are a mom that potentially wants a stop sign that is within your community and people are blazing down the driveway, you can create a Facebook group or create an online petition and start to tell people of why it's important. So I literally see it from that perspective where there's ways to get it out there. And of course, you can go and do it the traditional way, where you go and you have the notepad and you're getting all the signatures. But you can also hop online. You can talk about like how important that is. So I think it's just a phenomenal and exciting time because we have so many different ways that we can employ media to really solve whatever problems we might have.
Well, with all the media out there, where does a successful media strategy start?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Usually, anytime I talk about building a media company, I really focus on three main questions. And those three main questions are something you always want to answer, but always continue to ask yourself that because you can learn more and more about it. And those three main questions are around your target market. Who is the person or people or organization that you're trying to target? You really paint a picture from an avatar perspective on age, location, interest. But I think if you delve down a lot deeper, you'll start to understand that when you are solving problems, you're solving problems because something might be keeping them up at night. So think about things that are their problems. Think about how you could potentially be a solution to their problem or provide a solution to their problem. So really understand the whole psychological aspect, but also, the age, the location, the 2.5 dogs and 3.5 kids, all those things are, of course, important, but make sure that you understand it as much as possible and continue to keep tabs on that because it can continue to change. The next question you really want to understand is your resources. Resources is often kind of attributed and associated with money. but it also includes time. If you are in startup mode, maybe you're rolling up your sleeves literally to make sure that you are doing as much as possible, as efficiently as possible. So you're going to play more to your strengths, things you're interested in. But maybe as you start to develop more clients and customers, you have your marketing budget. So you're looking at money. So again, resources is your money and your time. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what that is and what that looks like. And then the final question is, what does success look like? What is your goal? Do you have an e-commerce store? Are you looking to really sell more widgets on your website? Do you want to get more trial downloads for your new software, your new AI, ChatGPT spinoff, whatever it might be?
Mm.
You're going to define that in a different way. If you want to have someone coming through your brick and mortar store, you're going to look at that differently. So be very clear on how you're defining success, because that's going to determine exactly what ingredients, what media you're going to use to make sure those things happen.
Well, I love what you said about target market. So many people, especially with media, you hear when it's like, oh, who do you need to know? How can I help introduce you to people? Like, well, I really work with everyone. And
Yes.
that's never a good answer. What do you have to say to people like that as far as why it's important to have a target market, and how the heck do you define one if your answer is, well, I can kind of work with anyone?
Yeah, I heard sometime I think ago in the networking world, if your target market is everyone, your target market is no one. So what we really have to realize that a lot of times we think that by saying a laser focused target market, we are not allowing ourselves to get the clients and customers that we ultimately want to have. By saying we work with everyone, we're trying to take on everyone. But in reality, when we say everyone, we're actually not being able to kind of trigger people to understand exactly who we're targeting and be aware when they're talking, having those conversations, or being on the outlook for those people. If I say, hey, I'm just looking for a car, you see cars all the time. But if I say, hey, I'm looking for a red car, you're going to start to hear that red car. So the more specific you can be about that, the more it's going to trigger people to see that. And oftentimes, once you say red car, you'll start to see red cars all the time, even though you don't think that you ultimately will. So that's one of the psychological things that happen when you're saying that. But also keep in mind, I talked about resources. Resources are going to be extremely important for everybody that has an idea, vision, or goal that they want to accomplish. And the reality is, when you say everyone, you're not being laser focused on who you're targeting, which means it costs more. And it costs more as far as time and money. Both of those resources I kind of touched on. So understand that the more targeted you are, if you know I am really trying to focus on businesses that are attorney-led firms that have single one individual within the firm that are solo practitioners, and they maybe focus on technology law, that's going to help you target a little bit more. If you say that, hey, I'm going to focus on the Virginia area, that gets you targeted a little bit more. If you start to drill down and say, hey, I'm going to find that city, I'm going to focus a little bit more. And the reality is, as you start to do that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more SEO talk, it helps you to drill down into what's called the long tail. When you go and drill down enough and you really have an idea of your target market and who they're searching, what they're searching for, and the type of searches they might have, or the things that they're interested in, it starts to get less competitive. So while you might be a firm that does what everybody else does, as you start to drill down more and more and more, you get to be that expert. You get to know exactly how you can solve their problems. And that's going to help you out tremendously when you start to pick your ingredients, but you also start to execute on those ingredients as well.
How do you pick the ingredients? Let's say you've defined a target market, you've got it narrowed down. How do you start picking ingredients for a strategy?
Yeah, I think you really go back to those three questions. But Mark, I don't know if you have like a favorite dessert or a favorite thing that you like to cook or make or even eat.
I love Mexican food.
Mexican food. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
We're gonna go with enchiladas. I always love a good mix of enchiladas. So if you're going to the grocery store to cook enchiladas, you want to make sure that you get the ingredients that you need for that. If you are trying to get bread, that's not necessarily great for my enchiladas. I don't know about everybody else, but you want to approach the same thing that you're doing. Those three questions that you answered, you want to go to the grocery store to pick the ingredients, and those ingredients are the ways that you're going to get your message out there. their TikTok, that's LinkedIn, that's podcasting, that's blogging, that's SEO, that's SEM, Google Ad. There's so many different
Hmm.
ingredients. Just imagine going to the grocery store. There's all these things. And if you go to the grocery store hungry, it's a dangerous thing that you're doing. And don't do that for your marketing. Be very clear on your avatar, who you're spending time with and who you're targeting. Be very clear on your resources and be very clear on what your goals are. And that's going to help you decide what are going to be those ingredients, what are going to be those platforms in the way that you're going to execute it. Because you can have the exact same business as somebody else, but because you've answered those questions in a different way, you're going to execute it in a different way, and you're going to look for those ingredients from a different perspective.
So give an example of what does good execution look like once you have the ingredients there, then how do you execute?
Yeah, so I'm gonna just pretend like someone that might be listening to this, let's just say they're an attorney and they are the solo practitioner and they don't have as much of the marketing budget. They're gonna kind of DIY it and do a lot of things themselves. What you really want to do is get clear on what exactly might be your superpowers, what exactly might be, as I like to call it, your secret sauce. Your secret sauce is going to be that thing that kind of sets you apart and makes you unique. Once you get kind of clear on that, you know that if you are potentially helping people out with the technology aspect, say you're doing AI. I'm going to say AI law because that's something that's booming, and a lot of people are trying to really understand exactly what that looks like and how to navigate that. One of the things that you can do is because you know that you love to talk, but you're not really as much of a writer. Maybe you're going to decide to start a podcast. You can start a podcast, and that's going to be the ingredient that you're going to do that from. And you can really approach a podcast in two separate ways, which is where you start to realize, like, okay, I have the ingredient, but how am I going to execute on that ingredient? So
Mhm.
you might decide that because I know so much about AI law, the ramifications, what it's going to look like 5 years from now, and a lot of great information, I'm going to do a solo podcast. That solo podcast is going to be basically for you to position yourself as an authority. So you're going to talk a lot around case studies. You're going to talk a lot around how exactly you work with clients, what that looks like. You might decide to experiment a little bit and have potential clients and customers, as long as, of course, the legalities are taken care of, to talk about their case and what that looks like. Or at the very least, maybe you don't even have them talk about that. Maybe you have them talk a little bit more along the lines of how it is to work with you, what that process was. Maybe they don't have to talk about their specific case or their specific situation, but you really get that opportunity to do that, which is phenomenal. But if I was to believe that maybe I enjoy interviewing, maybe I enjoy talking with people a little bit more, maybe I'm going to take that exact same ingredient and I'm going to execute differently. I'm going to take my podcast and use it as a way for me to develop relationships with potential referral partners. Maybe I'm going to have other attorneys that are on that are going to come on the show and talk about their business. And maybe, of course, I'm going to learn more about who they are because my gift is to ask questions to learn more about them. I'm going to do that. But on the before and after, I'm going to start to develop that relationship with one of my referral partners. So hopefully, when someone says, hey, do you know somebody that knows about AI and law? I'm going to be top of mind. So those are two different ways that you could take the same exact ingredient and execute in a completely different way.
Well, as you start executing, does the definition of success does it change, and how does that as a guiding light, a true north? I would imagine as you get in and you get a little more niche, you find out, oh, AI, TikTok, whatever. Oh, LinkedIn's really popping for me. I'm going to focus on that. Does the definition of success stay the same, or do you think it changes over time?
No, I think it definitely changes over time, which is why you always want to define exactly what that is. And when you pick the ingredients, I usually say you pick one or two ingredients that are going to be integral to you so that you can really own and master it. So if you're going to do a podcast, maybe podcast is going to be your big thing. But just as you said so well, maybe you want to experiment a little because maybe it's a younger demographic that you want to try to focus on, but you know that TikTok is something that might be booming. So maybe you experiment a little with TikTok. You take some of your podcasts and you can repurpose them into TikTok, or you could do reels or any different things. But just know you could pick that other thing to kind of experiment. But one of the big things that we sometimes forget about our business is that it's definitely a marathon. And as you start to build and grow it, it's going to evolve and change just like we are. So maybe you're starting out as the AI go-to person, but maybe after 3 years, you decide there's not someone that has written a book about what this is and what these ramifications might be. So you're saying, I'm going to write a book, and then maybe my book is going to be an opportunity for me to start doing speaking engagements for corporate agencies. So all of a sudden, that same ingredient that you're using, you're going to use from a different way, because maybe now you do use your podcast instead of referral partners you're trying to have on. Maybe you're going to use it as a way to interview other businesses that you might potentially want to work with. So it's just thinking and keeping tabs on what the answer to those questions are, because they'll evolve. And in the same way, as your avatar, your ideal client as you are evolving and changing, so are they changing. So the ramifications of what's happening with AI could change in the next 3 years. So maybe you're going to provide a different type of information to them. So it's always paying attention to what that is and what that looks like. I think it's a constant, always a never always changing. You never stop kind of learning about it from that perspective.
Well, with everything you just said, all the different ingredients, how do you have longevity when things are changing so quickly? How do you know when to let go? How do you know when to hold on?
That is a very, very challenging question. And I don't think there's necessarily is the right
Mhm.
answer to it. I think a lot of what you have to do is ultimately similar to that question of like, what does success look like? Because when you start to kind of hold on too long, it's sometimes because you're kind of resistant to change. You're resistant to like how things can evolve. And I say often, even on my show, I say, you often want to be more attached to the why than the how. And we get so stuck on like how we're doing things. I'm using my podcast or I'm using TikTok to do X, and X might be, doing solo podcasts so I can increase my authority. And we get attached to that how, but why are we doing that? We're doing that so that we can help to improve the lives of businesses and organizations that are thinking of incorporating into their ecosystem, for lack of a better term. We have to remember that why, because that how might evolve. The algorithms might change, the impact of podcasting might change. We might find out our ideal clients doesn't even listen to podcasts even anymore.
Mhm.
So we have to say, okay, well, now I'm not going to do that. So maybe I'm going to do something else. Maybe I'm going to do a vlogging on YouTube instead. So you have to evolve, but you have to pay attention to that why. And it's really hard to know when. But you have to be constantly changing. And that's why I say you want to choose one or two different ingredients, maybe three tops, because if you have that kind of built-in kind of innovation, testing, experimenting, you're always going to be able to make a smaller pivot than you would if you had to like close up shop on an
Mhm.
entire strategy that you were executing on.
Well, it sounds like answering why is per that's what I'm thinking. It's purpose driven. Would that be true? That it's bigger than you. It's not just you and your strategies.
Absolutely. It's definitely purpose driven. And I think it's something that, you always have to keep those tabs on, because if you don't pay attention to the purpose, you can lose sight of like why you're doing all the things that you're ultimately doing.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. If you were to tell somebody, if you're going to get going and do one thing, above all, it could be reiterating something we spoke about. It might be something we haven't touched on yet. But if you're to say, gosh, at least do this one thing and do it great, what would you tell people to do with in the context of you are your own media business?
Absolutely. Definitely go ahead and get started. Jump into the grocery store and just pick an ingredient and decide to experiment with it right now. I think one of the things that we don't realize, which is a misconception around success, is that it's a straight path. I often say success is much more like a plate of spaghetti. The people that are successful are the people that don't go straight. A lot of times it's a windy road, but they continue to persist. So try something, experiment, do it at a very low cost, low risk opportunity, and just kind of go from there.
Thank you. If people want to find you online, where's the best place to go?
Mark, you can definitely find me at iamgresh.com. That's IamGresh.com. And I have links to company, everything, and all the awesome things we're working on.
Thank you so much for the time, Gresh. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
And see,
I love it. I love that.
we're done.
Yes, that was fun.